Hello, I'm Dr. Peter Gillis, and talking to you about digital transformation and the new reality. And I had to think about the weather outside today, and maybe you can see it behind me. It's a little snowy. And this is what the great professor at Harvard of organizational behavior, Fritz Roethlisberger, talked about in his book, The Elusive Phenomena. And that is the knowledge of and knowledge of acquaintance with. Right now you can look behind me and you can have knowledge of the fact that it's pretty cold outside. Things look pretty much the same. Cars have roughly the same shape. Trees and bushes have roughly the same shape. You know where they are. They didn't change where they were positioned. But there's something different, yeah? And it's a little snow on top of them. And it's not a gigantic difference, yeah? So, you know, how much difference could that really possibly be? So we have knowledge of. Snow is covering things. We know what snow is. We know its properties. And we understand it pretty well. But that's just what Fritz Roethlisberger was getting at, is that once you've understood something, once you have knowledge of, it's knowledge of acquaintance with. It's actually getting out here and having the snow get on your glasses and your hair and your camera. The things in my backyard, in this example, are pretty much the same. The bird feeder there is just covered with a little bit of snow, and I can blow it off very easily. The windowsills here are covered with this a little snow, and we can take this and I can just, you know, I can bring it back to how it was, except now my hand is freezing, and I am freezing, and I am extremely miserable. But you say there's only been a small change to the environment outside. Well, these small changes, we can have, again, knowledge of them, but knowledge of acquaintance with brings a whole new level of misery. And these are the kind of things we need to talk about in managing the new reality. Oh, I've got to get back inside. Oh, dearie me. Oh, so it really feels nice to be back in something that is a little bit more predictable, an environment that I can control just a little bit better. Wow. So managing the new reality, we might have some small changes in our environment as leaders and as managers. And it could be that it has to do with some new media, social media channel or something like that. Or back, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, we were talking about RFID and how this might change things. But today we're talking about big data. In fact, when you talk with Joe Peppard or Jackie Moore, you'll be talking about actual artificial intelligence. And what is that going to do to our world? It's really interesting to think about. And, you know, but as we talk about these things, you're going to be moving from, okay, here's some cool technology, and then you have to then really implement it. So what does that mean for your strategy? How does that mean, what does that mean for how you're actually going to implement it? And that's really important. So there you'll get some really good insight into these things. And when we talk about managing the new reality, then we have to say, okay, well, we understand the technology, we understand the snow that has fallen, and some people can say, well, it's not that big a deal, but boy, from a distance, maybe I agree with you, but once I get into it, and once I really start trying to work out the bugs within it, oh, I'm not really sure, you know. And so that's again, the knowledge of. We know about snow, we know about digital technology, we know that these things do bring changes, but knowledge of acquaintance with. Once you start doing it, then it becomes quite a different thing. I'm, I'm also reminded of, maybe you remember these things from a couple of years ago. You would go onto YouTube and it was these commercials where somebody would get on there, and of course they were very casually clothed, but living in a spacious house with really cool sports cars, and saying, how can it be that today we're still working in the old-fashioned way, that you get into a car and you drive to an office, and and you sit in an office working all day and then you drive home again. How stupid, how ridiculous, follow our 10-step program to being a super entrepreneur, and you can stay home all day and do what you want to do. And so, all of a sudden COVID comes along, and we're all working at home and have, in many cases, a lot of extra time on our hands. And what I've heard from many of my clients is, gosh, it would be nice just to get back to work, sort of separate work and home, and, be really nice. I enjoyed that time in the car, so things can change so quickly. And we need to be robust enough as managers to deal with that new sensation, not just the thought that, well, there's a little bit of extra snow in our lives, but we need to make some practical changes to what we are doing. Well, what would those practical changes perhaps look like? Yeah? So in other words, we know about it, but knowledge of acquaintance with what's really going to happen. I do some coaching, and one of the things that really strikes me is it's very helpful to know the change management models. We need to have a need, we need to have the need and the vision, we need to have a guiding coalition, we need to make a communications plan, we need to do all that. That's very helpful. But that's not the thing that people ask for coaching on. They ask for coaching on really basic interpersonal things. And I think as we look through the research and the articles on the competencies needed for digital transformation, they're not a lot different than the competencies we were looking at for re-engineering in the late 80s and early 90s, putting in an agile organization. These things, once you get stuck into them, once you get quite acquainted with them, there are some really key elements that keep bubbling up and are where I think we should focus our efforts. So let me just talk about 3 of those and just take a couple minutes to discuss those just a little bit, just to whet your appetite. And then, I'll look forward to seeing some of you at Managing the New Reality. So one area we might think about is systems dynamics. Now, I'm not going to get into a bunch of formulas here with Greek letters in them, but system dynamics is really important, and it leads us to one of the most important insights in organizational psychology, which is behavior follows structure. Behavior follows structure. Yes, behavior follows structure. And so whether it's the structure of your organization, so is it an agile structure? Is it very hierarchical? What kind of structure do you have? Well, you can already imagine that behavior changes based on what kind of structure you have. And so we'll look into this rather deep. And if you want to look into Dan Ariely on YouTube, he's a behavioral economist, and he talks about someone who has to maybe get a new hip replacement. And you've gone through some pain therapy and you've done all that kind of stuff, and you find out that you think, well, let's replace the hip. And just a week before they're going to go in and get their hip replaced, you find out that there's one medicine that you haven't tried for the pain. What do? Do you just let the person get a hip replacement and think, well, better next time? Or do you say, wait, let's postpone this and try this one medicine before we actually go all the way and cut into your body and saw out bone and put in some metal? Well, the good news is a huge, the overwhelming majority of doctors answered, well, we would take, we would postpone the operation and we would put in, a regime of this new or this other medicine that we hadn't used yet. That's the good news. But then the question was asked slightly differently. So all the same stuff. Person has a bad hip, I'm going to go in for a hip replacement surgery. But now you find out that there are actually 2 medications that you didn't use. So what do? Do you postpone the surgery and try the one medication and then try the other one? Or do you let the surgery go through? And slightly worryingly here, most doctors said, yeah, I think I just let it go. I just think I would go through to the operation. Well, what changed? Actually, only one little thing changed. We went from 1 medication that you hadn't used yet to 2. But the structure of the problem changed, and so the behavior of the participants changed. Well, where can we see these things in our normal jobs? Where can we see these little areas, these little leverage points that seem to make all the difference? And this is some of the things that we need to talk about when we get into managing in the new reality. The second place we can take a good hard look at is your personality. Who are you? How do you behave? And so I like to really dig down a bit here. Yeah, what is that software in your head? What do you do when you don't know what to do? What do I do when I don't know what to do? Yeah. So what is the software in your head? What will you tend to automatically do? What kind of behavior will you automatically tend to show? And part of that has to do with the system that you are in. Don't underestimate it. But part of it has to do with what is the system up here? And how does that prefer to tackle issues? How does that prefer to lead in a new situation? So there's snow outside. There's a new reality. And so how will you tend to address that? And what could you learn from other methods of addressing that? We'll also talk about your behavior, because sometimes what you're thinking is not always what you do. Yeah? And you're holding yourself back and you're thinking, well, I'm the most junior person here, or she's much more senior than I am, or do I dare to ask, a question where everyone's going to roll their eyes? And, so sometimes, what we're thinking and what we would prefer to do, well, we hold ourselves back. We check ourselves. We filter ourselves. And sometimes that's really good. And sometimes it's a disaster. Well, how would you know? How would you know if it's really good or if it's a disaster? And we can talk about this. We can really get into it. And here's where I really enjoy talking about leadership, because very often you've got the cool stuff, you've got the artificial intelligence. I mean, what could be more cool than that? Data mining and all these great things that we can do. And we can even sit down and think very hard about how would that fit into our strategy? How would that alter our strategy? What kind of commitments do we need to make? And we can make real good strategy plans. We can make our balanced scorecard with all kinds of key performance indicators and say, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to focus on. But it's in the focusing, yeah? It's in the going out the back door and getting in the snow that you really realize, what are the unintended consequences of this? We rarely think about those. What are the unintended consequences of this, and how am I going to deal with them? And how could I deal with them better? Finally, how are you going to tell the truth? Which truth? Oh dear. Are we in the ethics section now? Yes, we're in the ethics section now. What do our ethics say about how we should and could address these issues? Well, what does ethics have to do with it? We just want to have a new Facebook campaign or something like that. There are real ethical considerations that we need to think about. And one of the things that I get the most pushback on is about telling the truth. Everyone says, yes, we should tell the truth. And then when I say, well, always? Well, you have to be discreet and you have to be a little careful. And sometimes you have to, tell not a lie, but a white lie, Oh dear, are we going to go down that road? Because the way in which you attack issues, the way in which you set up the systems that will drive the new strategy, allow you to get the new KPIs, realize that success in the marketplace. If that is based on people not telling the truth to each other, how much success are you going to get? Well, you might really question that. Yeah? So telling the truth all the time allows you to set up systems and approaches that are in line with reality. Your alternative is that you're setting up systems and processes that are not aligned with reality. And there's one thing that you don't want against you as a leader, and that's reality. Yeah. So if reality is against you, wow, you're going to have a lot of trouble with that. So as we go along, we're talking about knowledge of and knowledge of acquaintance with. In other words, let's not make this a theoretical discussion. Let's talk about the real stuff. Let's talk about the things that we find insurmountable sometimes, that we just can't get around, that cause stress in our lives. Let's talk about who we are as people. What will we prefer to do? Why do other people prefer to do other stuff? Can't they just get on the bus? And and why do I have such difficulty with some people and not with others? And how do I manifest my personality? And does that come out in an ethical way? In other words, am I helping my organization, my team, to build a new approach to this new reality that's based on truth, that will align itself with reality? Or am I fudging it a little bit because I just find it very, very difficult, sometimes even impossible, to come out and tell things how they really are? And we have many examples of this in all kinds of organizations, and you've heard the stories, yeah? And you've heard the stories from the Enron disaster to the Challenger launch, that where people, they just didn't stick close enough to the truth. So a big part of this is also going to be that last bit there of ethics. What are your ethics? Are you true to them? And how could you stick to them just that much better? So I'm looking forward to meeting you, looking forward to going through this really interesting set of workshops. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be relevant. And not only will you get knowledge of these things, but we're going to interact with each other so that we get much closer to knowledge of acquaintance with. And that will help us be more effective. Look forward to seeing you.